This is round one of the monthly audit. I'm Jimmy from Mood and Credit. Today, we're going to look at some of the scam apps out there, specifically in the Philippines. And there's some crazy ones. You got apps run by Chinese cartels out of Cambodia who register with fake companies and fake CEOs with fake LinkedIn profiles and fake photos. It's crazy. These scam apps are our today's loan sharks. And who are they targeting? They're targeting anyone who can't get a loan normally. Loans that can go from $3 to $30 in a week. Loans that will leave someone dead. So, to understand how a $3 debt can completely ruin a life, you first have to look at the massive void that digital lending applications fill across Southeast Asia. Out of the region's 660 million people, over 460 million are considered credit invisible. They are not unbanked, as most have basic accounts or digital wallets, but because they work in the informal economy without standard tax records, legacy traditional banks flatly refuse to underwrite them for basic credit cards. Locked out of a legitimate way to build a credit profile, this mathematically invisible population has become a captive market for highly organized predators. Legacy banks simply lack the frameworks to underwrite a modern gig economy workforce. A decade ago, the landscape looked very different. If you needed quick cash in the Philippines, you went to a local neighborhood moneylender. Before a 2017 crackdown, Filipino banks served just 11% of Filipino borrowers, while the other 89% relied on informal channels. The most common was the 5 to 6 loan, a street level hustle where borrowing 5 pesos meant paying back 6. You paid a flat 20% interest rate collected daily, and it was enforced by local street toughs. Back then, the system was informal and extremely limited, with a single operator handling perhaps a few dozen borrowers in a single community. Today, that decentralized neighborhood hustle has been transformed into an industrialized transnational digital empire. As mobile internet spread across Southeast Asia, lending moved directly from the neighborhoods into the app stores. Now, instead of street toughs, the operations are highly coordinated and largely directed by mainland Chinese syndicates. They utilize the exact same development teams, servers, and captive labor forces originally built for crypto pig butchering scams. But instead of conning wealthy foreigners, these syndicates are now focused entirely on extracting micro debts from the local working class. The victims are overwhelmingly young, with surveys showing that 60 to 70% of digital lending users are under the age of 35. The perfect example of how this trap works is a young woman living in Manila we will call Maria. Maria needed a small loan to cover some basic expenses. Banks would not lend to her, and her friends and family had little money to spare. The ordinary channels of credit had already closed. So she did what millions of people do when they run short on cash. She opened the Google Play Store and typed in the words online loan. She found an app that looked completely reassuring. It had a near perfect 5-star rating, thousands of glowing reviews, and promised instant approval with minimal paperwork and money transferred within minutes. The app itself was specifically designed to look friendly. Many of these platforms use bright colors and cartoon mascots like lions, cats, elephants, or birds, giving them the appearance of casual mobile games rather than predatory financial services. Maria chose one featuring a small cartoon puppy. Nothing about the brief application form suggested she was walking into a trap. It asked for a few personal details, requested 3 references to confirm her identity, and required extensive permissions on her phone, including access to her contact lists, messages, device storage, and social media links. She was approved for a $50 loan, but the app immediately deducted a 30% service fee from the principal. Within a week, the balance had skyrocketed to $100. The app's notifications started instantly, beginning with friendly reminders, escalating to notices about interest charges, and finally transitioning into aggressive SMS messages demanding she settle the balance quickly. Maria scrambled to pay the debt down as the fees and interest rates approached 400% APR. By the end of the second week, she managed to reduce her remaining balance to just 90 pesos, which is roughly $3. But hours before the final deadline, a knock came at her door. A Grab driver left something at her front gate. It was a delivery of funeral flowers. accompanied by a small card bearing a clear message that debts have consequences. Because Maria had granted the app permission to access her device, the collectors had everything they needed to destroy her life. They went through her Facebook profile and identified her boyfriend. They created doctored, deepfake photos of Maria with another man and sent them directly to her boyfriend's Facebook inbox and via SMS. He called her, she cried, and she desperately tried to persuade him that the photos were fabricated. But the syndicate didn't stop there. They began publicly shaming her in the comments of her own Facebook posts, asking why she was a criminal and a deadbeat. They sent messages to her phone accusing her of being a gambling addict while warning her friends not to trust her. Debt collectors called her workplace, her colleagues, and anyone they could get a hold of. So now let's think about how they operate. The machine behind these lending apps relies on a massive infrastructure of intimidation, and it has grown with startling speed. In the Philippines alone, online lending apps have been downloaded more than 73 million times, and the digital lending market processes over $1 billion in short term loans every single year. The people enforcing these unpayable rates are thousands of Filipino workers sitting in offices with ordinary corporate titles like credit collection specialist. Many of these operations trace back to places like Cebu and other cities along the outer rim of the archipelago. Areas that once hosted illegal gambling operations and pogo sites have increasingly been repurposed into local call centers running these online loan sharking platforms. In practice, the only job these specialists have is to enforce repayment through intimidation, harassment, and public shaming. When users grant these apps access to their phones, massive amounts of private data are copied and transmitted to remote servers located outside the Philippines. Cybersecurity investigations revealed that this data flows into infrastructure linked to operators in Cambodia and Laos, where the technical development teams behind these Chinese linked platforms operate beyond the reach of the country's internet controls. The United Nations now estimates that organized cyber fraud networks in Southeast Asia generate up to $36.5 billion annually, and this mass scale debt extraction is a highly lucrative component of that ecosystem. If you look at the app stores, it appears as though there are hundreds of thriving independent domestic fintech startups competing in the market. Apps with names like Fast Cash, Happy Cash, Cash Lending, Pondo Piso, and Mocha Mocha process tens of millions of dollars in short term loans every year, cycling thousands of small debts through the system daily. But the reality is entirely an illusion. Many of these applications are not independent companies. They are little more than reskinned versions of the exact same software, produced by a small, concentrated number of development teams based in Laos and Cambodia. A few dozen engineers can maintain hundreds of nearly identical lending platforms simply by changing the branding, logos, and app names. They artificially manufacture their popularity by purchasing fake 5-star reviews to push their rankings higher, while using automated bot networks to promote the apps across social media. When you try to look for the corporate structures behind these apps, you find nothing but ghost companies. A legitimate fintech firm operating in the Philippines, such as Tala, employs dozens of local software developers, fraud detection specialists, and engineers who build compliance tools and credit scoring algorithms. Yet the loan apps appearing in Philippine app stores have absolutely no visible engineering workforce. There are no open source repositories, no engineering blogs, and no evidence that development has been contracted to outside software firms. Instead, the network is hidden behind layers of shell companies and fabricated executives. Take Pete Shipeng Zuo, who is listed on LinkedIn as the president of FT Lending Master Philippines Corporation, the company behind Fast Cash Loan. His profile has over 500 connections and a Makati office address, but lists almost no real information aside from personality traits like decisive, brave, mature, bold, and passionate. Another executive, Rebecca Wang, claims to be the CEO of Yinshan Tech Group, an operation building credit infrastructure for emerging Asia. But outside of LinkedIn, neither of these individuals has a digital footprint. They have no presence on major Chinese business platforms like WeChat, Weibo, Douyin, or Zhihu. Their profiles feature polished headshots with nearly identical blue backgrounds, sporting lighting and facial features that carry the artificial look strongly associated with AI generated portraits. The regulatory reality is that local authorities are flooded with victims. The National Privacy Commission has received 12,921 complaints in the last few months alone, reporting the exact same illegal tactics: the unauthorized use of phone directories, the disclosure of false information, and the processing of personal data for harassment. Specific companies have been cited in these reports, including Finamex Lending Incers operating Pondo Peso, Unipeso Lending Company operating Cash Lending, and Fcash Global Lending operating Fast Cash. In the end, there is a strange and terrifying imbalance. Millions of borrowers are trapped in endless debt cycles, interacting with what appear to be hundreds of competing financial apps, while the underlying system is controlled by a small number of foreign developers. From those hidden offices flows not only exorbitant interest payments, but the financial behavior, personal contacts, and private lives of millions of smartphone users. It is a coordinated digital industry designed to extract capital from the most vulnerable populations in Southeast Asia, turning smartphones into inescapable traps.